So maybe we won't even pass the mics around then if they don't really work.
Well, I think once the room noise goes down, it'll be
Okay.
audible.
But let's still repeat the question just for the benefit of people online. Okay.
Yeah, we're just about ready to kick off here. Let me do a couple of housekeeping type things while I'm here. So let's see, emergency exits. You can go down the stairs. You probably came up right here or out the hall to the left. I recommend out the hall to the left in that's where the coffee is. Coffee, tea, and water. There's bathrooms downstairs at the bottom of the stairs and also just across the little entryway here. We'll probably shut this front door and folks can come in the back once we get the meeting going. I put the Wi-Fi address and password meeting in the WADs with the little @ sign exclamation point. Like I say, this is a shared facility. So there may be other people running around, nothing confidential. My name is Frank Paspan. I'm with the University of Alaska Fairbanks and happy to work with everyone on the carbon capture work group. We're having a joint meeting today with the hydrogen group. So Aaron, you want to take it from here?
Right, thanks, Frank. Patty and everyone online, can you hear us okay?
Yes, sounds good.
Terrific. And just out of curiosity, Patty, how many folks do we have online today?
We have 2 more minutes till the bottom of the hour, so I expect a lot more, but 22 right now, and it's folks are joining.
Okay, should we wait another minute or two, Frank? I think that clock is fast, actually.
Yeah, it's only 11:29.
It's 11:29.
Oh.
Give it another minute.
Damn.
Okay, all right. Let's just wait a minute. Okay, because I know at least with the hydrogen group, people trickle in right at the last minute.
I am not going to do that intro again.
Well, it's okay, it's for the people who are here.
Okay, yeah.
Anyone have any good stories from Labor Day weekend while we're waiting?
It's still hot in Arizona over Labor Day weekend.
I made a 1,000-mile round trip.
You did, just for this meeting?
No. No, he said what I did this weekend. I had a 1,000-mile road trip.
Where did you go?
Eagle. 500 miles each direction. Village Corp had its annual meeting and the tribe had its annual meeting.
Awesome.
The only animal I saw on the road was the rear end of something fast. I don't know what it's about this high. That's about all.
Okay, okay. Sam, at the risk of exposing you, I saw an interesting social media post from you. You look like you went someplace interesting this week.
Oh, dislocated in time in terms of the location. That was from last year, but
Oh,
my adventures this week were closer. But Barry's ringing after pass, so I'm sure folks should probably do better.
great, great. Where are we on time?
30.
11:31. All right, well, we're a minute late, so let's get started. Welcome everyone to our joint meeting of the Hydrogen Working Group and the Carbon Capture, Utilization and Storage Working Group. Greetings to those of you who are online, and we are here live today in person in the BP Energy Center. Our groups are not merging. We're just kicking off our fall meetings today together because we have a speaker that we think is of interest to both groups, and it's just a nice chance to cross-pollinate new faces. So welcome to everyone, and thanks to Frank Paspan, the CCUS group organizer, for securing the space and getting all the IT set up. For those who just walked in person, there is coffee and water down the hall to the left that Frank went over. So do help yourself. Patty, are there any initial announcements before we kick off with updates from the group?
Nope, I think go ahead.
Okay, Great. Well, we always kick off our Hydrogen Working Group announcements, or Hydrogen Working Group meetings with announcements and updates from folks. And so this is a chance for you to introduce yourself if you are new to the group, or if you have been too shy to introduce yourself in the past, or if you see a lot of new faces online and you want them to know who you are. So for anyone here in person or online, this is your chance to introduce yourself. And Frank, I'm wondering, can we hold a mic to your computer so everyone can hear when they
I think
notes
it's
or
pretty
something
good.
like that? Okay.
Yeah, but yes, if it's insufficient, I'll mic up the computer.
Okay. Well, is anyone here in person who wants to introduce themselves?
Sorry, this is Janet Reiser, and I'd like to introduce myself. Some of you already know me from my previous 33 years in Alaska on Chugach board and head of AEA for a bit. I'm now in Nebraska working with a hydrogen boiler company and running that. So I just want to say I love everything about Alaska. I even kept my phone number. So I'm just excited to be part of this group. Thank you.
Thank you, Janet, and I owe you a phone call that's overdue. So glad to hear you on the call, and thanks for the introduction. Anyone else online?
Hi, good morning. My name is Abhijit Dandekar. I am professor and chair of petroleum engineering here at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. And I'm really looking for, I guess there is somebody speaking in the background. I don't know how much you got.
We got you.
Okay, and I'm really interested in this. I have this in my mind to assign as a senior capstone design project or something along those lines. So I'm really interested. Thank you for organizing this.
And congratulations to the Petroleum Engineering Department becoming the Energy Resource Engineering Department. That's great news.
Thank you.
Very fun.
This is Dave Roby.
Hi. Go ahead. Go ahead, Dave.
I think that might have been it.
That's it. Dave Roby.
Man, a few words, Dave Roby.
Well, I will just say that Dave Roby is an amazing resource for statistics about all things energy, petroleum, and natural gas related. And was a great help for those of us who put together the Hydrogen Opportunities Report. So thank you, Dave. It's great to have you on the call.
You're welcome. This is my first time as being part of the Hydrogen Working Group.
Terrific. Terrific. All right, I see another hand up. Edward Jenkins.
Thank you. This is Edward Jenkins, Energy Transformation Officer for Massachusetts Electric Association. This is my first time joining Hydrogen Working Group.
Welcome, Ed. It's great to see you online. I'm just going to go in order here. We have Andrew Vanderjack.
Hi, everybody. This is my first time joining the group. I am an attorney at the law firm Van Ness Feldman. We run a hydrogen group called Clean Hydrogen Future Coalition out of the firm that focuses on federal policy, but also emerging federal legal issues focused on hydrogen. But I also I personally do a lot of work in the state of Alaska, including on the North Slope. So thanks for having me.
Great. And it's always fun to hear where people are calling in from. So Andrew, where are you calling in from, if you don't mind me asking?
No, not at all. So I'm in Washington, D.C. I grew up in Southeast Alaska and came out to work for Senator Ted Stevens and kind of got stuck.
Great. All right. Shruti?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Hello, I'm Shruti Misra from Sandia National Lab. I am working with the SASTA team, and we have started working on hydrogen storage techno-economic analysis in Cook Inlet area. And I'm looking forward to learn from today's presentation. Maybe some of these will be applicable for our work. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. JR.
Well, hi, this is J.R. Wilcox. For those of you who might not have been on before, there is a small subgroup of us that are trying to work on issues related to finding engines that actually could burn hydrogen or hydrogen carriers legally, and ways to progress that. Over the summer, we did find a group out of Israel called DOR Motors that makes a really interesting control unit that can be put on the front end of an engine that allows, for example, methanol to be cut into the existing diesel fuel without taking downstream modification of the engine. And that actually opens up some more near-term pathways to possibly introduce some hydrogen or hydrogen carrier fuels into the Alaskan system. So I think that's probably worth of discussion, maybe down the line in a little bit more detail. But I think it's a very interesting technology.
Sure, that's fascinating, JR. I would love to learn more of that about that, and we'll follow up with you. Jeremy Casper from Alaska Center for Energy and Power.
Thanks, Erin. There's enough new faces here, and it's been long enough since I've joined either group that I just wanted to reintroduce myself. So I'm Jeremy Casper. I'm the director of the Alaska Center for Energy and Power at UAF, and nice to see everybody.
Thank you, Jeremy. Don Conley from Sandia National Lab.
Hi everyone, Don Conley. Thank you, Shruti, for introducing yourself. I'm the portfolio manager at Sandia for subsurface storage of energy, including the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, but also including subsurface storage of hydrogen. And so Shasta is part of my portfolio that Shruti mentioned, and it's great to meet you.
Perfect. Thank you, Don. And then we have Justin Freeman.
Hello, everyone. I've been a part of the carbon capture group for a little while, but for the benefit of the folks coming from the Hydrogen Working Group, my name is Justin Freeman. I'm Senior Projects Engineer for Usabelli Coal Mine, based in our Fairbanks office. I've been doing I've been managing a lot of the work that we've done on the carbon capture side. We are also experimenting with some of our sister companies with some potential biomass applications, and even looking at, maybe how hydrogen might fit into some of that. So I'm pretty excited to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Justin. I love all these introductions. Brian.
Hello, everybody. Good to see you. I used to participate quite a bit. Glad to see things are coming back. I'm working on basalt minerals that can be used to create composites, paint, clothing, and aerogel textiles. If anyone's interested in by far the world's best insulative clothing, hit me up. It's very good for cold water submersion and military use.
Thank you very much, Brian. Any other introductions online?
Andrea Mamoli, Sandia National Labs. I work in a group called Renewable Energy and Distributed Systems Integration, and that's my perspective on my interest in hydrogen, is how to integrate it with distributed energy systems, and to make them more resilient and maybe more appropriate to the climate. So good seeing everybody again.
Thank you, Andrea. Anyone else online? Mike McElhaney, there's a familiar face.
Hi, Aaron. This is Mike. For those of you who don't know me, I work for Aaron. I handle our international, including some of our international carbon engagements with countries interested in carbon management in the Arctic. Thank you.
Thank you. More introductions online. I appreciate all this introduction of between groups, because I know that we haven't all met or seen each other before, or perhaps in some time.
Hi, this is Mary Ann online joining. I just wanted to let you know that working on several energy projects here in the state of Alaska, one with HIF Global, which uses renewable energy to produce green hydrogen through electrolysis, and capturing CO2 from the atmosphere through a technology devised by Porsche. It's really exciting because the end product is e-fuels, and looking forward to hearing more and working with this group on this opportunity.
Terrific. Thank you. Jamie Holiday.
Hi, yes, I'm Jamie Holiday from the Pacific Northwest National Lab, joining from Richland, Washington. I'm the Senior Advisor at PNNL for Hydrogen Technologies. I've worked with the Hydrogen Working Group quite a bit. Excited to talk to the CCUS folks. And we do a lot of work with the Shasta group, so it's good to hear our SNL colleagues online too.
Yeah, can I call you back in an hour?
Whoever is not on mute, please mute yourself. Any other introductions online? Lisa Wilcox, did you unmute yourself to introduce yourself?
Yes, sure. Yeah, this is Lisa Wilcox. I'm a director with Berkeley Research Group. I'm an energy consultant. My main project in the state is working with NSTAR Natural Gas on their future long-term natural gas strategy. And I'm really interested in the development of CCUS in the state and the feasibility of that for future gas export projects, as well as the supply of potentially our utilities.
Thank you, Lisa. Appreciate the introduction. More folks online who would like to introduce themselves? All right, well then what about here in the room? And we're gonna pass the mic. Hopefully.
I haven't joined before. My name's James Watson. Recently been working with Tesla, and before that, Safecoast up here. But moved back to Alaska from Texas. Was down there building the lithium refinery for Tesla last week. Anyhow, I'm looking for something interesting to do up here, so this is certainly a good group to learn from. Thank you.
Any other introductions in the room? Can you pass it back to, oh, go ahead.
Hi there, I'm Donna Mears. I'm a representative in the state legislature in South Mountain East Anchorage. I'm on House Resources and got the first crack at the governor's CCUS legislation, and I've got a lot to learn about hydrogen.
Perfect. Two tables back there. Thanks for your patience. Those of you who are online.
Yeah, I'm Chad Floisner, General Manager of Ontario Energy Center. We're looking to develop a coal-fired power plant and carbon capture. So mostly on the carbon capture side, but very interested in hydrogen.
Great. Those of you online, are you hearing these introductions that are mic'd here in the room? Can you give us a little bit of feedback?
Yes, we are.
Yes.
Great, everything is working. Excellent job, Frank.
No worries. IT man. I got the t-shirt.
Yeah, that's good. Any other introductions in the room?
Good morning, I'm Dale Clark, Engineering Manager with Alaska Marine Power. Just to give you an update, last year we completed a resource assessment with the Shasta team on storing hydrogen in depleted gas reservoirs in the Cook Inlet. Just to let you know that that paper, the resultant paper, has now been peer reviewed, and we expect it to be published in the next few days or a few weeks in the International Journal of Applied Energy.
Thank you, Dave.
It's a great paper.
Yeah, when you when that's published, could you send that to me or Patty so we can distribute it to the group? And you can see here now the overlap between our hydrogen group and the CCUS group. Lots of areas in storage and CO2 transport and sequestration as well. Other introductions or announcements even from folks about interesting hydrogen or CCUS activities. Okay, before I give to Frank, and you can come up, Frank, I will just say that the Hydrogen Fuel Cells and Technologies Office at DOE just last week released announcements of funding about 62 million across 15 states for various hydrogen fuel cell technologies offices, fuel cell technology awards. There were no awards in Alaska. I'm not sure if anyone in Alaska applied, but they are moving the national ecosystem forward. So Patty can put that link in the chat if you want more information about who some of those awardees are. So with that, I am going to, and if there are no more announcements, this is your last chance to raise your hand and update everyone. This is a fun part of our meeting. With that, I will give it to Frank to kick off the rest of our meeting and introduce our speaker.
Thank you. So last week, had the pleasure of attending the annual meeting of PCOR, the Plain CO2 partnership, and that was in Bismarck, North Dakota. I'm going to do some high-tech visuals here. So also there, Chad Schleusner was there with Terra Energy, Kayla Yonke and Haley Payne were there from AOGCC and DNR. So they had a one-day annual meeting. They had a one-day regulatory roundup. Like these were the materials from the regulatory roundup. And this was a meeting for like the Conservation Commission and the leasing companies. They get together as a group annually, hosted by PCOR. And it was like Alaska was sitting next to Arkansas, was sitting next to Alberta, you know, so there's like the partnership is, I think, 15 states and 3 provinces of Canada. Regulators show up all the way from Louisiana, Texas, and just compare notes, trying to get best practices shared. So that was an awesome meeting. And it was great to see how beautiful North Dakota is. Some other things, we took a one-day field trip to the Dakota Gasification Company, the Great Plains Synfuels plant. And this is like a pretty phenomenal facility. It's co-located with a power plant and a coal mine. And they have the capability at this plant to make like urea, ammonia, and up to 175 million cubic feet of natural gas a day. It is a monster of a plant. It's been on and off, and I think its cost of natural gas, they convert 18,000 tons, up to 18,000 tons of coal into natural gas. And then they capture all the CO2 from that process. So it's like 80 million scuffs a day of CO2 that's now re-injected into the Broom Creek Formation, which is right below the operating plant. So pretty cool operation going on there. And they were, if you're interested in doing a tour, they have like an amazing 1,200 square feet. It's the size of this room, a 1,200 square foot model of the operating plant. Lastly, we've got this PCOR Atlas, which I now have a PDF of. So if anybody wants a copy of this, I understand it is great bedtime reading with your children. And it goes all the way from the global carbon cycle. You know, there's all the gigatons, what our greenhouse gas is, how much CO2 is there in the atmosphere, through the whole process. So really awesome. I've got edition 5 on PDF. They just came out with edition 6, which this is, and I'm going to keep it. But if anybody wants to join the CCUS work group, you can email me at ccusalaska@gmail.com, and we've got a website there too. So happy to get to know new folks. Aaron.
Can you please put that information in the chat?
Okay, it should be, can you see that on screen sharing now?
Yes, I see it on the slide.
Yeah, and maybe Patty, can you retype that? The ccusalaska@gmail.com.
Sure thing, it's in the chat.
Thank you. And we've got a website too, ineuaf.uaf.edu/carbon. We have a number of materials available there. That Institute of Northern Engineering.uaf.edu. So was, oh yeah, Aaron, sorry.
I just wanted to add, I forgot to mention in our introduction, if you are brand new to the group, and you're interested in getting future emails for the Hydrogen Working Group, please put your email into the chat or just send it in the chat to Patty Egan, who is our group facilitator, so that she can include you in future mailings and meeting notices and send out additional information.
So this is a bit of an eye chart. This is, I had an opportunity at the P Corps meeting to walk the group through it in of course about 15 minutes, the activities, successes, and some of the disappointments we've had, like UAF not being selected for the Regional Initiative for Technical Assistance Partnership. Yeah, I put this slide up there, and each bullet I put like a picture of the Aurora Borealis or doll sheep or moose, and they loved my presentation. So if you ever need to like capture the people's attention, I recommend megafauna. People love big animals, birds and whatnot. But we've had I'm not going to go through any of this here today, but just I did want to recognize also Senator Giesel and for all your work on getting the carbon storage bill moved through and move forward, and to support UAF's efforts and funding. I think it's $2.2 million as part of the university budget to do the Northern Cook Inlet carbon storage assessment. So I guess Justin and I have been talking about this for a couple of months now. We had a meeting over at like Chalista or Hillcorp, at the Hillcorp office, yeah, the JL Towers, and he mentioned that he was going to share at a international greenhouse gas workshop meeting or hydrogen meeting, a presentation on hydrogen. And I've asked him to localize it and give some interesting examples. Jim's got a project that is being evaluated in the Aleutian chain for using excess electrical power. And I hope you'll have a chance to talk about that and share that with the group, because I think the opportunities are amazing. And the linkages between hydrogen and like creating carbon-free power with carbon capture, I think there's a lot of linkages and such. So that's all I really want to say. But again, if you want to join the work group or get the PDF or the partnership atlas, just give me a shout. With that, Justin Freeman, Coffman Engineering. It'll be forward, backward, photon disruptor. Oh, last thing. SpaceX Polaris Dawn mission is scheduled to launch tonight, Alaska time, 11:38 p.m. unless inclement weather. So that's where I'll be at 11:38. It's on SpaceX.com. Watch.
If anybody's walking around, just watch the tripping hazard that I've just implemented for us in the room. So conscious of that.
Let me get your slide set up here. Patty, can you see the slide there? I think you want to try the clicker, see if it works for you.
Looks good online.
Oh, let me do one thing here. I'll do like the full screen on that. Booyah.
There we go. So just for folks online, I will be trying to monitor the chat. And so if you have questions, just put them in the chat and I'll try to address them real time. And then we'll take some questions at the end. For folks that are in the room, I'm going to try to basically go through most of the material and then kind of do a Q&A at the end. But if there's something particular you want to address in the moment, raise your hand and go ahead and ask a question, or you can answer in the chat as well. I will try to repeat the question back to the group because I think that we're having audio issues. So I'll probably air the question back just for the audio folks on the phone. But really excited to present to this group together because I've been part of the CCUS and hydrogen group for quite a while. So just a little bit about me. I came to Alaska after university. I graduated from Boulder, so talk about North Dakota. You just visited there. We barely squeaked by North Dakota State, and yeah, it was close. Very good football team. Okay, so,
Everybody was watching that game. Everybody was watching that game. There was a lot of booing going on.
My friends were all making fun of me that with other universities, and I was like, you are watching North Dakota State play Colorado on TV right now. So what does that say about the Colorado? But anyways, I moved back to Alaska because I wanted to raise my kids in Alaska. I love Alaska. I just came back from a moose hunt last night, so I'm a little bushy-eyed. But I want them to have amazing careers and opportunities in this state. So not only for my kids, but for my grandkids. And so I think that that's what a lot of what we've been talking about is the CCUS and hydrogen groups is we've been talking about the future opportunities for the next generation. And I think there's also this awesome opportunity to replicate new energy systems across all of our microgrids called villages, right? Like we've got really high energy costs. And so how can we unlock the renewable and energy potential of this state to lower the energy costs for all Alaskans? So that's what I'm going to try to basically bring together. This is a presentation that originated from the World Hydrogen Conference that I gave in Houston in May. But I tried to kind of bring in examples to make this real for Alaska. Yep.
Did you get a moose?
We set up, mostly we're doing setup of camp. So we're going back. It's north of Anchorage and south of Fairbanks. Somewhere in that general vicinity, we've got our moose camp set up. I don't give up my fishing holes. I don't give up my moose hunting. So what I'm going to kind of walk through is some examples of Alaska, what we as Alaskans are dealing with, particularly with the rail belt system. Talk about the hydrogen economics. How can we make these economics pencil, whether that's carbon capture, hydrogen, e-fuels. We're going to go through some different use cases. And then wrap it up with thinking about this in that it has to be sustainable. We don't want white elephants. We don't want stranded assets. Like this has got to be sustainable beyond tax incentives, right? It's got to be a market-driven process. But I want to acknowledge all of the work that this group has done right here, because there's been a phenomenal amount of studies and publications that have been done. I went a little old school, and I had AI help me create a picture for the cover page. But there's all these studies, and I don't think I even got them all. So, I was trying to read through this to make sure that I wasn't just parroting what you all already know, because there's been some phenomenal work about the geology, about the business opportunities. And so I want to make sure I hopefully left you with one nugget of insight from this presentation that you come away with. But really an acknowledgement of, and if you haven't read these studies, they're very well done and very comprehensive. So I'd encourage you to read them. And I'm probably missing a couple of great ones. If I did, I apologize. So just to kind of recap some of the things that we've seen with these studies and some things that we all know. The Cook Inlet is facing this pretty massive shortage of natural gas. And I had a little bit of a stint where I left the state to go to London. I went to Houston. And when I left, I was working on the 5 PSI steelhead project. So we were lowering the flowing wellhead pressure of the steelhead wells to 5 PSIs because we had this imminent crunch of natural gas. And then 10 years later, I come back to Alaska and we're talking about the natural gas crunch that's still coming at us, right? And so we also, though, we have the Alaska gas pipeline that could potentially come, but it's a large giga project, right? I mean, it's $40 billion project. That's a very large risk. And for a little while there, I worked for Chevron for about 16 years. I worked on giga projects. I worked on a $50 billion project. I can tell you they're not really interested in those projects, right? Because they have a wealth of drilling opportunities in the Permian and some of the offshore where they know how to build offshore platforms. They also know how to basically drill the Permian. And they've got 30 to 40, 50 years of drilling in those opportunities. So they are focused on their capital allocation to these quicker return projects. And so it's hard to attract that big type of capital because that's a big risk, right? But we all know that it's not going to be here in the next 7 to 10 years. Like we've got to have something in the interim to plan. But we also have this amazing opportunity to, really sort of leverage the renewable potential in the state. But that mixture is very variable in terms of even the studies that we have that are looking at the same thing. So, I mean, whether it's wind, that base of 45 going to potentially a maximum of 847 megawatts. Same thing with solar, anywhere from the base today of 1 to anywhere to 456. And then hydropower going to 866. So can't do all of these things, but some things I'm going to talk about is some things that I've seen that have enabled some of these bigger projects to move forward. And some of the things that are making some of this a little bit more difficult, particularly in a northern climate environment with solar as an example. But with all of these studies, what's interesting is that when you look at the fossil fuel power generation on the rail belt that needs to exist to balance out the power and basically make sure that we have a comprehensive power system, we only decrease the capacity, at least from what I saw, by about 10%. So you're going to have these assets that are only going to be likely utilized. So how do you make a business model where you're really a swing power generator, right? And so we've got to look at our existing asset base and how do we leverage that as much as possible so that we can have cost-effective, lower carbon, reliable power, in the railroad. And I think that the same thing is what the villages want, right? You want low-cost power that's reliable and ever cleaner, lower carbon, right? And so it's not straightforward. I mean, I think that this is not a really easy problem to solve. So I think with all of that, though, fossil fuel is going to be mixed. We heard about the biomass and the coal potential at CCS in the west of Sydney. We have a lot of options and a lot of common themes in all those options are that we need to upgrade the transmission. So everybody seems like we're on board with that. We need to do that. That benefits all of us to be able to massively move some of our systems. The other thing is that there's a large CO2 potential in the state of Alaska. We are not a large CO2 emitter. We just aren't. We are a large exporter of emissions. That's what we do when we export the crude oil, right? We are exporting those emissions. We're not a material CO2 emitter in the grand scheme of the gigatons in this world that are being emitted. So we don't really have anchor tenants as you think about like an emitter that's like, here's this anchor tenant of like high quality CO2 that you can basically make a hub around. We don't really have that. Like that's kind of missing in the Alaska infrastructure. And there's some great legislation that's been put in place from a regulatory standpoint that's going to help enable that we have that legal certainty as to how this is going to be structured, which is fantastic. A lot of places don't have that. But we're also going to be competing. If we want to basically be a CO2 disposal business as a state, I categorize CCUS in two different ways. If I'm using CO2 for EOR, I have viable economics on the back of the oil, right? So if people follow Denbury at all, they basically have this term before they got fired by ExxonMobil. They were doing some great things. They called it blue oil because they injected more CO2 that came from the use of that barrel of crude oil than was actually produced by extracting that oil. So I can make economics work with EOR all day long. If you're trying to do CCS, where you're injecting CO2 into saline aquifers, it's more of a trash disposal, public good business. And if you're getting single digits, you should probably be happy. If you're getting a positive economic return. So we have to think about CCUS in sort of those two terms. And then there's some niche uses of CO2 for building products and other things. That's a growing market. But we got to then differentiate between biogenic CO2 and anthropogenic CO2. Those are very two different things. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But I'm very excited that, Willow and Pika, we're showing the slope's got a little bit more life, right? So there's some development that's coming on there. We've seen the plateau and the slope, but we need to be thinking about what's Alaska in the next 20, 30, 40 years. So just taking the Chugach Integrated Resource Plan as sort of an example, we're heavily dominated by fossil fuel today. Not surprising, right? We've got a lot of fossil fuel in our electrical mix, but we've got some, and Aaron or Frank, you guys can make sure I'm not missing chat's question. Okay, thanks. So we've got some pretty aggressive decarbonization goals too, right? So while at the same time that we're facing a gas shortage, we're also trying to decarbonize as a state. So hopefully we can, chew gum and walk at the same time, but those are two very difficult things to do in their own, right? So, we've got to figure out how we can do both and have that reliable and affordable energy system. So wind is one of those things that's identified in that study, right? So we've got wind as part of that. But we then said, okay, we have 90% where our fossil fuel system still needs to be in place. Part of that is because the intermittency and variability of the wind systems. So what you see there in the top right is basically a study from Western Australia, where you had a very large wind farm, and that variability in terms of that capacity, right? So when you look at it on a month basis, it doesn't look that bad. When you look at it on an hour basis and day basis, you see that variability within that system. So you can counteract that by basically doing some battery storage and also having diversity of supply. And that's some of those studies pointed out. The other thing that you can do, and this is some of the stuff that we're seeing down in the lower 48, is, are you trying to sell into the grid? Are you trying to basically make products with it? Are you trying to basically use some portion of that where you can sell into the grid, and then some portion of using that variability to serve, let's say, electrolyzers where you're making hydrogen or other niche fuels? So, or are you trying to do all three? Maybe you're trying to do arbitrage, where you are basically selling to the grid one day because you can make the most amount of money, or you're making hydrogen the next day. And people are trying to model this, and we're trying to help our clients to try to figure this out. What's the best asset utilization? How do you look at this as a project, as an energy system, but then step back out and look at the grid as an energy system? And sometimes those answers are very different regionally. The other thing that we're seeing with wind is that with solar, we're seeing this decreasing cost curves that continues to drag out, right? We're seeing year-on-year decreases in solar costs. Wind, we're not. Because you think about solar, it's a little bit more of a, the PV technology there, silica and manufacturing, right? Like that cost curve is still going down. What is wind turbines? Wind turbines are a lot of commodities. You got a lot of steel, you got a lot of kit that goes into a wind turbine. Those prices, unfortunately, are going up, and that is impacting the cost of wind development. That impacts part of the cost of wind development. The bigger part is they don't have access to free money. So the interest rates that the developers are having to basically pay has far more impact on the dollar per kilowatt than basically the impact to the cost of development because of materials. Cost of materials is still material, but it's dwarfed by the cost of borrowing. So hopefully that changes as well. We'll see the interest rates drop. If you've got a mortgage or you're trying to refinance, you probably cross your fingers for personal reasons. But cost of financing for wind developers has really materially impacted a lot of developments across the world. But we have a great resource base in the state, right? And that's the theme, whether it's solar, talk about that in a second in terms of seasonality. We've got wind, we've got geothermal, we've got great carbon capture potential, we've got huge coal reserves, right? We have all of the above. But I would argue we can't do all of the above. We've got to be focused because some of these projects have competing priorities. And so how do we choose the right infrastructure balance with a long-term view of maybe we do everything all in the long term, but we've got to figure out the short term and the medium term. Yes.
You want to take a question now?
Yeah, please. Yep.
Here, maybe repeat it for me.
Yeah, so the question, you mentioned rising costs for wind infrastructure. Can you speak to the specifics for this in Alaska? So I would look at it two different ways. There is the offshore wind cost, and then you have onshore wind cost. So both of those are experiencing pretty material costs in infrastructure. With the floating wind or the seabed structure, you have a lot of the same infrastructure that goes into those build outs. Wind power generally is quite a bit order of magnitude higher cost. So again, I think for Alaska, we're impacted by whether it's offshore or onshore. Onshore should be cheaper from a development cost standpoint. Offshore is very expensive, but you have very good wind potential there. But I think both of those are impacted outside impact by the financing costs. They basically both live in that same. Hopefully that answers the question. So solar, this is you could just ignore the numbers on the left because it's just a generic profile, right? This is just a sample solar development. With this high latitude, I always have to Google, is it longitude, latitude? I can never remember. So I Googled this morning. It's latitude. High latitude environments. You see this profile, right? Where disproportionate sort of between the seasonality of the summer, the winter, what I should have really done. I guess it kind of helps illustrate, you know, that differential capacity during that peak winter, summer versus what you do in the winter, right? So as you think about your connection to the grid, or you think about your offtake agreements, if you're making, you know, hydrogen, for instance, what do you build, right? Like, what are you trying to build with this type of variability in your production capacity? And so, you know, how do you look at your use cases? Do you make hydrogen at certain parts of the year? Do you do some type of battery storage? Are you behind the meter? Are you doing a grid interconnection and then passing on that intermittency and volatility to the utility operator? There's a lot of things, but there's commonality across all. So the nice thing about this is as you solve this problem, you can repeat the solution through across these different use cases. So solve it once and then repeat. But sometimes the infrastructure needs and that local power needs changes what that right answer is, right? And so arbitrage is the other thing. So if folks aren't familiar with arbitrage, you're basically just kind of trying to, you know, use your resource and kind of maybe flex what you're doing, selling electricity to the grid, for instance, or you are making hydrogen. You know, that arbitrage, that ability to basically flex. But we see this type of example, particularly with northern climates a lot, right? So you've got a great solar resource in the summertime, not so much in the wintertime. So how do you translate that into your business models? And so there's different solutions depending on regionally where you are in the country and kind of what that local market is. So the other thing, if the weren't complex enough, you also have a changing technology landscape. So as we think about these different applications, post-combustion capture versus pre-combustion capture, right? So if folks are maybe from the hydrogen group, we'll start using terminology I might have to explain a little bit more than I'm used to with the CCUS work group is post-combustion, just simply think about it as, you know, you got 4% CO2 coming out of a natural gas turbine, 12%, let's say, coming out of a coal plant. You have to concentrate that, you have to strip that CO2 out of the flue gas and increase that concentration to something on the order of 95 to 99% concentration, right? So depends on what you're going to use that CO2 for, to inject it either into saline aquifers and EOR, or if you're trying to use it for other things, the grade of CO2 that you maybe have to meet from a spec standpoint changes. A lot of that has been done today with amine towers. So kind of the Mitsubishi and Shell technologies, they basically have huge amine towers, and you basically rip this amine through these contactors, the flue gas counterflows, and you then take that rich amine over to a regenerator, heat that up, and it off gases the CO2, and then you compress it, dehydrate it. But there's new technologies coming out, like Net Power or Savante, that approach that problem differently. So Net Power does pre-combustion. So they use an air separation unit to basically strip out the nitrogen. And then they create a pseudo combustion environment where they're taking critical CO2 back to the inlet. Now you have oxygen, you have CO2 as your inert gas, and now you're blending that with natural gas. And so you don't have to do the post-combustion capture because you've done it with pre-combustion. So they are at the scale, they're working with Oxy, and they've got a project in the Permian that they're doing utility scale demonstration of 300 megawatt plant equivalent. And they're going to capture nearly 1 million tons per annum with that plant. So they've got a demonstration facility that's a 50 megawatt equivalent plant that they've connected to the grid. They're working with their partner Baker Hughes on basically the compressor for the critical phase CO2. And so they learned on the 50 megawatt scale, and now they're basically learning how to do 300 megawatt. Savante, I ran their carbon capture pilot for the DOE in my previous life there. And at the time, we were doing 25 tons per day. So that plant was second generation. They had done one up in Canada, the Husky facility. And then we were doing in Bakersfield 25 tons per day. And so now they are basically scaling this MOF, this solid absorbent, to be able to go up to 500 tons per day. So as somebody that's trying to develop projects, as somebody that's a utility operator or power company, or somebody that's working with industrial facilities, how do you make the right decisions, right? When the technology is changing so fast, do you invest in the existing technology, or do you wait for somebody to de-risk and commercialize some of these newer solutions that could significantly change your cost point for doing carbon capture? And then modern hydrogen, this is one of my favorites. So they have a process that does methane pyrolysis, where they have very high temperatures and they use plasma to separate the CH4 methane into elemental carbon and hydrogen, right? So out of their reactor comes hydrogen and then drops out elemental carbon. There's a great video of Bill Gates filling in a pothole with this black gooey stuff that basically came from their reactor. So no sequestration required, right? So people are familiar with blue hydrogen, you got steam methane reforming, autothermal reforming, you need carbon capture, right? This is why I'm so glad that our CCUS and hydrogen groups are together, because my world lives in both these worlds all the time, because they cross-pollinate, right? So the technology is changing so fast, and that really is difficult. And in the CCUS landscape, so this is an infrastructure map of the United States, where you have all the natural gas infrastructure overlaid over the lower 48. You also have all of the CO2 pipelines, and there's all the emission sources. They're kind of in the background there a little bit. But what I pulled the data for was basically natural gas processing and ethanol plants, because those two use cases are, to me, some of the things that are in the money, if you will, right now. So with the tax credits that you have with 45Q, you can make money doing carbon capture on natural gas processing and ethanol, because you get pure CO2 and all you have to do is compress and dehydrate that CO2 and you're off to the races. So everybody along that value chain, whether you're doing the capture, whether you're doing the transportation on the pipeline or the injection, can have enough of that pie where they're making enough money to get the returns on their capital. Is that Frank?
What is that chart showing us on the left, the map?
Yeah, it's kind of a messy map, but it just shows all that white is natural gas pipelines. The turquoise, sorry, I normally have a legend on there. The turquoise is the CO2 pipeline infrastructure or planned infrastructure. And then a lot of the basically the circles are where the major emission sources are in the country.
Thank you.
I think there might be a hydrogen pipeline, but it's buried in there in the layer. But it's basically along the Gulf Coast. It's very limited. There's like 1,600 miles of hydrogen pipeline. It's all petrochemical along the Gulf of Mexico. And the other thing is some of the darker blue lines, not the turquoise, those are geological formations. So you got the Delaware Basin, you got the, some of the Duvernay, you got the DJ, saline aquifer. So it's overlaying some of the geology too. So, so what can Alaska learn from some of these other major projects? And when I speak, every single project is under NDA, and so I am trying to basically share themes without violating any NDA information. So hopefully I do well. Inflation is impacting everybody. Just across all industries, everybody is seeing significant inflation. That's no surprise to anybody. Our Inflation Reduction Act has not done its job, if that's what the point of it was. I've got a graph later on where interconnections for utilities there is major bottlenecks in the lower 48. And part of that I think is sort of a lesson learned for Alaska is the level of intermittency that's coming onto the grid that utilities just can't take, right? And so, there's a lot of battery storage projects that are trying to help address that. That helps with that sort of misbalance that you end up with. They used to call the California, what was it, the duck bill or the duck curve, yeah. No longer a duck curve anymore. It's like a canyon, right? Like as soon as solar starts to ramp up, it basically all the other sources aren't really needed as long as there's availability. But the other thing too is everybody has access to tax credits, right? So that's kind of a nice level playing field. But we still, even though it's tax incentivized, we still have market economics that are going on. So your feedstock and your cost of feedstock is really important, and logistics still matter a lot, right? So if you have high logistics costs and high feedstock costs, it doesn't matter that on pencil that you think that you can make some money with the tax credits, because trying to get to an offtake agreement, somebody's going to come in at a lower cost than you, and they're going to get that contract. They're going to get that offtake. And so there is still a market that's playing out, even though it's tax incentivized. The other thing is, you know, when you look at offtake agreements, and for folks that maybe aren't familiar with offtake agreements, just think about that as a commercial term where you come together with the producer, and if you're trying to buy a certain volume of whether it's natural gas or renewable natural gas or hydrogen, it's basically just you're signing up to a certain amount of term and a certain amount of price, generally referred to as an offtake. So folks aren't familiar with that. That's what I'm referring to. So you have a lot of folks that are trying to achieve scale, right, to lower their development costs, and then they're trying to basically negotiate offtake agreements. And there's an imbalance, right? Because let's say you use hydrogen as an example. Maybe you have one transit authority that has a couple buses, and that's all they need from an offtake agreement standpoint. But they're planning on buying 30 or 100 buses. So the developers are trying to develop the largest scale they can to develop at the lowest unit cost, but their offtake agreement isn't going to be mature for the next 10 to 20 years. So part of what people are doing is they're trying to phase their capital development, have repeatable facilities such that they can match that offtake demand growth, but it doesn't exist today. So there's a little bit of inefficiencies there, but I help deploy a factory model, and one of the things that I see the operators get this right, they're going to do well, is they're going to build that first serial number 1 unit. Serial number 2 and 3 and 4, they're going to come down. And I think that will benefit the developers in the long term. Texas, I meant to look this up before I came here, but I'm pretty sure they're going to have, if not already, more solar and more wind development than California, even though they've been doing this for a lot shorter time. And so, you know, I know we like to give the Texans a hard time that, you know, divide Alaska in half and we're still bigger than, you know, well, Texas is still the 3rd state in the nation. But we can learn some things from them, right? ERCOT has had some struggles, right? I personally lived there when they went dark, and that wasn't very fun, you know, and that was because it got really cold and their power generation. But Frank.
Yeah, ERCOT.com has got a really cool online like power generation summary, and it's real time. It shows you the disposition of which manufacturing is what mode of power generation provides what percent of power, and it's remarkable the shift from day to night and even from day to day. But yeah, really cool online resource, ERCOT, ERCOT.com.
The folks that catch it online, Frank was just talking about ERCOT. It's got some great information online about kind of their power system in real time, what the mixture is across the state. And so I think, you know, it's sometimes good to be a fast follower and follow somebody that's leading and some of the stuff that we can learn from those lessons. Right? I hit a couple on these things. I would just re-emphasize maximizing that existing asset base. So we look at our infrastructure as a state. How can we leverage the existing infrastructure today as opposed to new build and repurpose that infrastructure, right? I think I've hit on a lot of these with wind and solar. The one thing with solar, behind the meter solar, particularly in California, this might not necessarily be applicable to Alaska, but when you look at the cost of generation in California versus the cost at the meter, there's a huge burden because of transmission, enormous. So if I go with microgrid on basically my solar to hydrogen development, where I overbuild my solar and I'm making hydrogen, I can pencil to a pathway to make money. If I try to do that with power purchase agreement, and now I'm basically getting burdened with the transmission costs, my economics fall apart. So a lot of behind the meter microgrids that are being developed because of that reason. If folks aren't familiar with the 45B tax credit, that's equivalent to 45Q for CCUS. There's some uncertainty around the final rules around this, and it's causing a lot of issues in terms of project certainty. And basically kind of the simple version of it is you have to have local, you have to have new renewable, and you also have to have hourly matching, right? To go back to the example where I'm talking about you're doing overbuilding your solar, you've got maybe battery storage, you're in a microgrid, it's literally all clean energy. Because I use that clean energy at 2 a.m. and I produced it at 2 p.m., I don't qualify for 45Q as the tax credit is written. I think that stuff will get sorted out as final rules, but that's the type of stuff where if you're trying to make investments of hundreds of $1 billion, you need that certainty, right? E-fuels, I'm gonna talk a little bit about like what that process is and some things I've seen. Biogenic CO2, so anthropogenic is fossil fuel-based CO2. Biogenic is basically from nature. Think about that, right? Biogenic CO2, great to use for e-fuels. Anthropogenic, you know, making e-fuels that you then burn in a jet, that doesn't make a lot of sense on the surface of it, right? So, and I would say that 45Q is really, because of that inflationary pressure, is not really seeing projects that are in the money at this stage, because any gains were anticipated to be benefit by the increase in the 45Q tax credits has been now wiped out by the increase in capital costs because of inflation. So just a quick reminder for folks, like where is the hydrogen use case today? So it's ammonia, it's methanol, it's refineries, steel production. So there's smaller use cases there, but you know, almost all of this is produced by gray hydrogen. So that is hydrogen that is produced from natural gas or coal fossil fuel based, and then that CO2 is released into the atmosphere. So it's very CO2 greenhouse gas intensive processes, but there's 110 million tons per annum. So if lower carbon can displace this, it's a huge market that's existing today. So we've got all these new hydrogen projects that are coming on, right? Like we should see decreasing hydrogen prices. That's not what we're seeing. And probably should have grabbed a little bit of a updated graphic on this, but this is just a nice graphic. But this is where some of the market distortions, and there's something called the low carbon fuel standard in California. And people were able to make their money with some of the hydrogen because they were able to take LCFS credits. So those LCFS credits were tanked because there was imported renewable natural gas that was coming into the state and drove down the price of the LCFS. So then people had to increase their hydrogen price because their LCFS wasn't covering basically that difference. And so now you've got hydrogen price that's, you know, $30, whereas per kilogram. Yeah, per kilogram. And I was talking to a transit authority, and this was a public forum at the Energy Leader Summit in California, and they had signed a $9 and $12 per kilogram, and they thought that they were overpaying. They were very happy to have that contract in place because now in the spot market it is really got a foothold. So, and because of that, you're seeing a lot of the fuel stations for light duty shut down. So do you understand really your economics? So this is a bubble map on the right hand side. So it really just kind of shows the relationship of your economic model and how the economics ultimately are going to generate a cash flow. They're going to generate a net present value. And what are some of the things that really move the needles? We'll look at a tornado chart here in just a second, but you know, hydrogen pricing, LCFS, tax credits, carbon offsets, your capital costs. Electrolyzers are a huge part of that capital mixture, right? And so there's a lot of Chinese electrolyzer manufacturers that are trying to come onto the market right now. And then you have a lot of American and European electrolyzer companies that are, maybe 50% more expensive, right? But do you want to trust that your hydrogen fuel cell is from a Chinese manufacturer, that at half the price, it doesn't have basically the runtime of, if you get 7 to 10 years with a cell stack, you're doing pretty good. Good.
Just a quick question, since we're talking about electrolyzers. I've heard that they only last about 5 years. Is that right?
Depends on this. Yeah, so how long do cell stacks make? Or sorry, how long do cell stacks last? So the cell stack is the part, it's like the engine of hydrogen production for green hydrogen. So it takes the water and it turns it into wet hydrogen and wet oxygen. You're generally, if you're using PEM, which is the proton exchange membrane, or alkaline, either one has a cell stack, just different chemistry and processes of how those work. A company like Nel might guarantee their stack life for 10 years. Other companies maybe get 5 years, maybe they won't give you a guaranteed stack life, right? And so there's a lot of variability, and there's what I would call a lot of PowerPoint electrolyzer companies out there. I'll leave it at that. That answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. So the feedstock or the OpEx, water, potentially a big part of your OpEx from I was just talking to a company this morning about how they were realizing how much the pretreatment of the water was going to affect their capital costs on their project. And then, if you're doing pyrolysis, for instance, well, your feedstock's natural gas, right? One super interesting thing that I've kind of come to enjoy about hydrogen is with this example, when you have pyrolysis, you're tied to basically the fossil fuel carbon pricing, or Henry Hub pricing, for instance, right? When you're doing green hydrogen, you're decoupling from basically the global methane pricing because you're just needing water and electricity, right? So it's an interesting dynamic that's kind of unfolding because your feedstock into making hydrogen is vastly different and can have vastly different market forces. So just a nugget that I've enjoyed learning over the last couple of years. So not everything's equally important. So this is just a generic hydrogen project. But key things that folks basically are looking for, payback period, how quickly am I going to get my return on my investment? Is it 2 years, 7 years, 15 years? And I can tell you, a lot of the big super majors and private equity, they want payback periods in 2 to 4 years. I've also met some super interesting people that are more tied to the insurance industry, for instance. So they don't care about 30-year payback periods. What they care about is stable distribution, right? If they get a 7% return and they get that for the next 30 years, that's what the insurance industry is, right? And so there's different stacks of money, or there's different sources of money. But what things, generally, hydrogen price is one of the biggest things, electricity price, capital costs. And we talked about water prices, right? So you see water rarely shows up in the tornado there. So sometimes that project, it can be material because now you're talking about all the pretreatment, or, just in terms of your water costs, if there's not a lot of variability in terms of your dollar per gallon on that cost, it might not affect your economics a whole lot. So that degradation rate that you're talking about, basically the life of the cell stack, that's what that bottom sort of bar is over there. Probably not a lot of upside, but some downside there.
Is the x-axis payback period or rate of return?
Sorry. So this is a net present value chart. And so for the question for folks on the phone was, what was the access on the X? I will get that fixed in the future, but it's net present value. And so the way tornado charts work with economics is you set everything towards your P50, and then you stress test your economic model. You say, what's my P10? So that's the probability that 10% of the time that will happen. And then what's my P90? So I know that 90% of the time that this will basically be within the range. And now you can stress test your economic to not say, well, I care about what the middle is, but I also want to understand how variability affects my projects. And then you can focus on the things that really move the needle. So there is a comment there of electrolyzer stacks could probably be rebuilt, maybe with only membrane replacement, no metals. Yeah, I think that's a very interesting development is you have a lot of rare earth minerals and things that are in those cell stacks, right? So you might be able to get your cell stacks taken back to the factory. Actually, I know you will be able to do this because I've talked about this with the folks, and then have a refurbished cell stack that may be like half the cost, right? So it's not necessarily like you've got to buy a brand new cell stack. It's like you bring it back to the manufacturer, they're able to extract all the value out of it and then refurbish it and get you a new cell stack at a portion of the cost. So great comment.
Question on the water, what is it, like distilled water quality, or like, is it salt, like ocean water just straight into, like, what kind of quality water do you need for like a PEM module?
Reverse osmosis, that kind of gives you like a good starting place. So very ultra clean water.
Ultra clean, yes. RO, got it, thanks.
Deionized water too, RODI. I did see a comment there from Patty. Aaron, sounds like a outline viewer. Some people are unable to see the slides. I don't know if we've gotten that addressed, or we'll have to send out the slides later.
Asking if most people can see the slides.
Patty, are you seeing my slides here?
Yep, I can, and most people can, but we just had one person who couldn't. So yeah,
I'm sorry, I can see the slides. I'm local to an office where I'm getting a lot of interruption, and I was just hoping to have a PDF file of the slides somehow, if possible.
Yeah, PDF is, we'll send it out to you
Yeah.
afterwards. Will do. Great comment from Jamie that there is some other types of technology that might be coming out that are already on the market that could be cheaper than alkaline or PEM.
By the way, this is Frank speaking, yes?
No, that's Ed speaking, but now this is Frank speaking.
Sorry, thank you very much, Frank. Look, Givy, who is the regional director here at BOEM, said, number one, get buddies with Frank. I'm a new guy here. I've only been here 5 weeks, but I have a lot of background in using at risk and tornado charts. And a question I have is, do you have a specialist who knows how to build these probabilistic Monte Carlo models that knows how to manage tail risk?
So hold that question for 1 second, if you heard that, and I'm going to address your question in a slide just coming up in a moment. Yeah, the water price sensitivity, yeah, that was a generic hydrogen project, right? Like as you get to regional, very specific projects, as you're competing for water, water usage is a big deal. A lot of times, particularly with the cooling systems, how we approach cooling systems is very drastically different depending on where we are and so just hold that thought for 1 moment. I've got a slide coming up on that I'll talk to a little more about that too.
And 20 minutes, just a time check. Plenty of time.
So this is just, we've got a bubble map that just shows this all needs to come together, right? Like your capital costs, your project costs, your uncertainty related to those two things, your economic modeling, commercial agreements, production simulation. You need really to have a full holistic understanding of all of these things to really make good decisions from a project development. And a lot of times what I see is people say, well, plus or minus 10%. What they really mean is that they have done an FEL2 study, or sorry, an FEL3 study or a FEED study, and they've got a bunch of deliverables. And those deliverables, that as an industry norm, if they've done those deliverables, it means that they're plus or minus 10%. But they have zero statistical backup as to why they're plus or minus 10%. It's just almost more qualitative than quantitative, right? And so because of that, this kind of stems from I've been in capital projects my whole life, and I've been working in this space, and that you can hear me dork out about this factory physics and a whole bunch of statistical modeling, but we have this brilliant guy that lives in Alaska. He was on the US ski team, and I said, Scott, I was like, here's these white papers, here's my textbook. I want you to build this model for me. So we were doing this at Chevron, and he said, I was talking about Excel, and he said, the only thing, I'll do this for you, Justin, as long as I don't have to use Excel. I said, perfect. So what are you going to use? He said, Python. So we have this proprietary model we've been working on for about 3 years now. And we're able to take anybody's schedule, their cost, their resource loading, and statistically model, what's happening with their project, and to really help them understand where that risk is. So people that are familiar with capital projects, you maybe have Primavera, you have Microsoft Project, you have a critical path, you have a left to right analysis. So this goes 5 layers deeper to really sort of understand where the risk is in the project. And then helps them identify that 45% of the time, your critical path is going to go through this node, right? And we can stress test, like if this takes 1 day, you say you can get this done in 1 day, but you also are telling me that this could take 50 days, right? And your median distribution is 20 days. So you have a skewed distribution towards, a risk profile on that tail. It could be a really bad outcome. And how you get your work sequence done effectively also manages that. So if I think about piping spools, if I get my piping spools to the site and they're not ready for them yet, well, now I got to go find a laydown area. Now I have to deal with preservation. Now I have to basically deal with the logistics of keeping the inventory of the piping spools. Or I'm trying to do SIM ops with the electrical crew, the piping crew. Now I'm out of sequence, and now my crews are super inefficient. So we really are trying to help our customers because of these thin economics with a lot of these projects to have very robust plans. Also that they can go to the bank with and get the capital developed. I'm going to speed up here because I'm running out of time. So back to the California market, California transportation, we see in a lot of red, means they don't have hydrogen. This is a use case of hydrogen on the right-hand side, 48-hour backup power. So we just set this tank a couple weeks ago. It's an 80,000 gallon cryogenic hydrogen tank made by Sharp. So hydrogen is liquid at minus 250 degrees Celsius. So that's about 20 degrees Celsius from absolute zero. So that is really, really cold. But they have this massive hydrogen tank. They run it through a vaporizer, then to go to fuel cells. And the city of Calistoga can then have 48-hour backup power. Because they deal with these wildfires in California where they just turn off the power because they don't want a wildfire. Don't blame them, but people still want power, right? So this is a combination of battery and hydrogen for long duration energy storage. It's kind of cool. It's a real use case. With hydrogen, I deal with naysayers of hydrogen all the time, and I understand it, right? Like this is kind of shows right there. Like if you can use electricity, if you can use the electron closest to that form of it being an electron, it's probably going to be in a more efficient process, right? So you see this playing out in the marketplace today, even though these vehicles are a lot heavier, they have more efficiency kind of through that life cycle of using the electron to basically power to the wheels. Conversely, using that for a Mirai, trying to get that to the equivalent, you got 459 kilometers versus the Mirai of 173. Well, we work with a lot of transit authorities. And that hydrogen for medium heavy duty, that cold weather performance, the weight consideration, the asset utilization, the fueling times, towing capacity, light duty, maybe don't care about as much of those things, although I've seen some lightning forum stories where it's not all roses on light duty either. And this is where, we're working with transit authorities and, when we're looking at diesel and fuel cell electric, battery electric, and they are planning on their shorter routes using electric buses, but on their longer distance routes, their buses are not working for these, and they are doing a mixture, right? And I think that that's part of the right answer is a mixture, like electric vehicle buses. And if you're at about $10 per kilogram of hydrogen, because of the efficiencies, internal combustion engine, that's about $5 per equivalent of diesel. Just recently, there's use cases there of ferries and light duty rail. So these use cases are really becoming real. These are products that cities are using. And Jim Stevens here, we've been supporting him, and I think this is a great use case for excess hydrogen, right? So City of Echa, they have excess hydro, And so we were helping him try to apply for a grant where you can use that excess electricity to be able to store that energy with a hydrogen storage, to then convert that back to the fuel cell. Now remember, there's some inefficiencies there. Then being able to use that for a use case in a village in Alaska, where you can use that excess renewable for long duration energy storage, right? So the developer type, that really does matter. So I came from a super major, balance sheet. They've got mature project processes. They are a little bit slower to act, right? But they can go to the bond market. They're not raising capital from projects. When you talk about a renewable developer, they know renewable, they know commercial agreements. They might have to go to the bank, right? They don't know hydrogen. And then you've got the speculative, where they are trying to build a portfolio of projects, maybe take it public, flip it, and then they want to exit. They're looking to get rich, right? But I had to learn this new vernacular, right? Do you have a bankable project? So that's meeting where the risk profile meets the investor's criteria, right? To secure that finance, going back to that win, right? Like that cost of borrowing is material to them, as opposed to the super majors. They're funding their projects out of free cash flow. So they do look at like cost of borrowing, but really there's not truly the cost of borrowing, because their cost of borrowing is maybe $2-3 in interest rate compared to somebody that's getting charged $9, right? So the fully wrapped EPC model, if folks have not heard of this fully wrapped concept, developers are going, and it's more of this renewable background where they're like, hey, fully wrapped, go build me a solar farm. People are like, great, I do that. I've built that 100 times, right? They'll guarantee the price, they'll guarantee the performance, and people are taking the same approach to hydrogen, where they want to fully wrap these hydrogen facilities. And the EPCs are going, here's risk, here's cost, here's risk, here's your cost back for fully wrapped, and it's doesn't meet the economic hurdles for the developer anymore because they've priced in all that risk. So the developer type really does matter. And the infrastructure matters a lot with the United States. Going back to this map, what infrastructure? So this is a great map for blue and turquoise. You've got the transmission, you've got basically the sinks. And then you look at this through the lens of green hydrogen. So all the solar potential in the United States, right? That's Southwest. So think about that too, is Alaska is trying to compete with this market, right? So the best solar in the United States is in the Southwest, that big giant red slot of the United States, right? Electrical infrastructure matters, but remember, behind the grid, that also matters, right? There's hydrogen that's being trucked right now from Florida all the way to California. So it'll make a lot of sense. That probably won't happen in the future, but that's happening today, right? So your cost of your feedstock, the cost of your electricity, all of this stuff matters. So we can think about Alaska, but if we want to have an export capability, we've got to be able to compete. And the cost of your feedstock matters. This is the other lens of the renewable potential in the United States. These are all bottlenecks. So there's all these companies that are waiting for interconnection agreements to bring their renewables to the grid. And they can't get on the grid for the next 4 to 5 years because the utility operator is saying, I can't deal with all the intermittency that I have today, right? So they're focusing on battery storage. So now you're getting folks, you got the 45E tax credit, and they're looking at, okay, well, how do I use my land position? How do I use this solar potential or this wind potential? And a lot of folks are turning to hydrogen as a potential use case. Folks have probably seen this before. This is the 100 megawatt design that we've been working on with now. But going back to that earlier comment there, the compression, standardization, the cooling. So if you're doing dry cooling versus wet cooling, that cooling and the water treatment are probably two of the very specific site-specific things that are very important to scaling green hydrogen.
10 minutes. Yeah. That clock's like 8 minutes.
Yeah.
No, it's fast. I tell you, get more time.
So hydrogen as a feedstock, I probably spent too much time in the beginning, but give me talking. I just like talking about this
cool stuff.
So e-fuels, so just the overall process, right? You're combining electricity and hydrogen with CO2 through a syn process. Now you can basically make methanol, jet fuel, gasoline, right? And then the ammonia process. So taking that electricity with hydrogen and nitrogen. We have an air separation unit, which is a very high capital investment, right? So that ammonia process then makes green ammonia. So just remember those two kind of processes. Nobody needs to turn into a chemical engineer overnight. But that's the high level sort of equivalent. So just to think about like, how much does the electricity going out equate to useful, heat or on the back end, right? So there's a lot of ways to heat into these processes. So potentially for heat recovery or low grade city heat to then create 1,000 gallons of e-fuel. So you're looking at 94 megawatt hours to the equivalent of 37.5 megawatt hours equivalent energy in that 1,000 gallons of e-fuel. So a lot of heat rejection where you're using that heat for that energy.
And that's with the pure CO2 supply.
Yeah. Got it. Yeah. Good point, Frank. Frank was just commenting that doesn't account for the potential energy losses of capturing that CO2. I think it's probably where Frank's comment was going. So can you make green ammonia? Can you make this work? So we talked about large scale renewables. Well, ammonia, depending on where your price point is about $300 to $1,200 per ammonia. I'll talk a little bit about that in the next slide. That's a lot of variability, right? But as we kind of look at this waterfall of the economics, and what we're seeing there is it's an NPV chart with a discount rate of 10%. So that initial investment where you're starting at $300 a ton, you're starting at $15 in terms of your green hydrogen production cost, you are woefully uneconomic, right? That's like, doesn't matter what the unit is, it's either $6 billion or $6 million, you're very uneconomic, right? So then how do you walk that back? How do you get to positive economics? Generally getting into a $1,200 ammonia price. You're getting into $4 green hydrogen price. That's probably the best that I've seen anybody be able to do. And I'm still questioning whether $4 is real. And then the green premium, right? That's kind of what people are doing when they're paying $1,200 for ammonia, is they're paying for that green premium. What's ammonia used for? It's used for food, right? I mean, this cost translates into other markets, right? So people are paying $300 today, and they're paying $1,200 tomorrow. That's going to translate into higher fertilizer costs. That's going to translate into higher grocery bills. So it has a knock-on effect, right? And then maybe a mining company just wants to blow stuff up with some green, green TNT. So this, I think it's also to think about that from a competition standpoint for Alaska, right? Like, who are we competing with? Who makes ammonia today? China makes ammonia today, right? So they also make very cheap electrolyzers. They make the PV panels. Like, they make a lot of the stuff that's needed for the green industry, right? And they're doing this on purpose. They are strategically investing in these sectors. So what are things that help? Feedstock, policy support, that logistics, right? Like, what's your logistics cost? Local champions, do you have tariffs or barriers to basically protect you from undue trade practices? And then the green premium. And you might not be able to see this super well. And I apologize, I didn't put the color chart in there, but basically all the stuff that's on the bottom where you're at $900 to $1,100 for the ammonia pricing per ton, that's all, green, low carbon ammonia, right? Where you're seeing that $300 a ton, that's all, fossil fuel based ammonia. There's a little bit of blue ammonia that's mixed in there that's got a little bit of a premium, kind of get a little bit of mixture there. So, we've got to be mindful of the global market. There's a lot, the market a lot of times is local. There's very little that's exported and moved because it's used locally. It's consumed locally. So the export market is much, much smaller than what's represented here. So e-fuels, just kind of stepping through those economics. And I talk about this because we've been helping clients, work through these projects, right? And so I'm sort of, I've made these generic enough that they're just indicatively kind of tell the story. But you think about $6.43 for average Jet A. sustainable aviation fuel is about $9. Almost all the airlines by 2040, 2050 have goals to be net zero. And a lot of them are paying for e-fuels and SAF today, but it is a fraction of their overall fuel costs. So they can buy this today, and then they'll readily buy this. But for transitioning the entire fleet over to this, we're gonna have to lower this price point, or we're all gonna be paying a lot more to go see grandma for Christmas, going on our flights. And we are a state that's gonna be affected more than anybody, because we kind of live on the island of Alaska to go through Seattle to see anybody, right? Long payback periods, green hydrogen, if that lowers, great. Your source of CO2, you know, if you can get biogenic CO2, that's great, but sustainably sourcing biogenic CO2 with basically forests, it's you know, crops, it's things, right? You can't haul that in with diesel trucks, because then you negate all of basically the emissions that you're trying to basically offset with the CO2. And so generally, biogenic CO2 is hard to scale because you have to match the local resource and have that sustainability factor with it, right? So the theme here, e-fuel, ammonia, green ammonia, difficult. And in summary, you know, we're also going to have to look at this through a lens of a market-based economy. We can't keep doing tax incentives. If anybody's reading the chart there, it's the national debt of the United States. I probably outdated because it's a couple months old. I'm sure it's increased since this chart was published. But I think that says something on the order of almost about $35 trillion, right? So we need markets, we need rules, we need the market to pick the winners and losers. And then, you know, this is fantastic that the DOE is helping get some of this base infrastructure. The IRA is getting this base infrastructure, because then as you depreciate those assets, you know, what I can sign up for in contracts in 20 years is different than what I need today to get that infrastructure off the ground. But we're going to need to move to a market-based economy in order for this to be sustainable. And then we want to make sure that Alaska is picking the industries and the investment that the state makes into jobs that are going to have sticking powers for that next generation. With that, that's all I have. One minute for questions.
Okay. So we have two questions in the chat. One is from Ed Donaldson. Asking you to comment, please, regarding how much future effort is going to shift to carbon negative zero in contrast to the more commonly known net zero 2050 approach.
Ed, maybe I'm very familiar with net zero 2050, carbon negative zero. I'm not sure if I've heard that term as much before.
It's a big deal at DOE that the legacy carbon in the atmosphere is continuing to pose a problem even if we achieve net zero in 2050. And there are a lot of initiatives to reframe the discussion to carbon negative zero ongoing, based on some videos that I was watching that DOE published. And I didn't know if you had heard about it from your perspective and whether or not there was any shift of effort about that. And that's the only reason I was asking.
No, that's very interesting. And I was asked by a very senior person what my opinion of direct air capture is. So direct air capture is incredibly controversial to a lot of folks, and that's taking ever increasing 420 parts per million or whatever it is today, 426, scrubbing that directly out of the atmosphere. And you know, we Blade where they're piloting that, and we're working some of the hubs. And my opinion of him to him was, well, it's very uneconomic today. It's very cost and energy intensive, but we need technologies in the future, because I saw something about the carbon budget. People are not familiar with the carbon budget. There's only so much, you know, emissions that we can emit for a 1.5 degrees C world, there's only so much emissions that we can emit for a 2 degrees C world. We're not on a trajectory for either one of those right now. And so we're going to have to figure out cost-effective ways to scrub the CO2 out of the atmosphere. I think using nature is probably going to be a big part of that solution. But we're not on the trajectory of either of those worlds. And so whether it's DAC or whether it's natural sources, we're going to have to get to a place where we're at net zero with our industry and our society, but we're also going to have to figure out how to go negative, like you're alluding to there.
Thank you.
Okay, and the final question in the chat here is, what in your view is the best and most promising market for green hydrogen where costs and prices could balance?
Yeah, so I think green hydrogen, like a lot of solutions, is going to have its place in the market. And I think that it really depends regionally where you are, but in general, what I would say is I think that hydrogen is going to use in transportation. I think it's going to be used in some form, but I do believe that there's very promising long duration energy storage that can displace the need for hydrogen for that. And so whether it's steel or whether it's vehicles that use hydrogen fuel cells, where that asset utilization is really probably more important than the fuel cost. There's a gentleman that described to me that ports, when they offload a container ship, they are running for like 4 days straight, right? So charging, even with fast chargers, electric vehicles, you know, hours are important to his business, right? So from a logistics standpoint, the price of his fuel is immaterial compared to getting that cargo ship off the berth and just rapidly fueling his basically heavy haulers and the logistics infrastructure. So I think where asset utilization and longer distance plays a role, I think you're going to see hydrogen in some form in the transport industry. I think power gen, there's lots of stuff that are burning hydrogen for power generation. But going back to that comment, if you can use the electron for power generation or more efficient storage than hydrogen, that's obviously going to win economically compared to green hydrogen. But I think it's going to have some form and carbon negative zero.
Just fine listening and 15 in the room. Effort. You put it in a very high quality presentation. So thank you, Justin.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
Thank you very much.
Anything else, Aaron?
I don't think we have a copy of the presentation. And feel free to continue to
Thanks, Aaron. Thanks, Justin. We're losing you, but Hydrogen Working Group next meeting is October 1st. We're still first Tuesdays of the month. And again, as always, the recording will be sent out and posted to ASAP's YouTube page. So thanks everyone for joining. Good group.